My name's Frances, and this is my first retreat.
Hi, Frances.
And I'm a Christian.
Okay.
And I'm struggling a little bit with your concept of God. And I keep going back to thinking about Jesus and thinking about the Trinity and Jesus saying that the Father and I are one.
Yes.
And wondering if that is like the pinnacle of that kind of Christian thinking, that kind of unity.
Absolutely. In fact, the image, I nearly said it, but I didn't this morning, right at the end of this morning's meditation, when I was talking about transcendence and immanence, and how what we were talking about during the meditation could be seen to be so far off the top of the mountain that it could be kind of abstract and philosophical, but it is actually at the same time describing the very human experience that we call love. And as I said that, the image of Christ on the cross came to me, that he is a representation, that image is a representation of transcendence and complete love. And that in that image, these two, transcendence and immanence, are contained. So actually, I feel that what I said this morning would have been the very deepest interpretation of Christianity. And when, for instance, Jesus said, "I and my Father are one," what he was saying was really what Benedict and I have just been saying, that if we go deeply into ourselves and discover what we are, essentially, that turns out to be what God is, essentially. In other words, the being in each of us is God's being. In fact, the only being there is God's being. In us, God's being is temporarily clothed in human experience, and we seem, as a result, to become a finite being. But to believe that there is a finite being, that is blasphemy. Because if there is a finite being, let alone 8 billion or 8 trillion finite beings, along with God's being, then God's being cannot be infinite. And then God is not God. So the highest Christian understanding that there is no room for anything other than God. God is everything. God is all there is. And that's what Jesus recognized when he said, "I and my Father are one." What I essentially am is what my Father, God's infinite being, essentially is.
I think, for me, it's about, there is this sort of...
You can just use the mic, Francis, so we can hear.
I felt with Jesus that there was a relationship with God. And I think that as Christians, we're encouraged to develop that relationship through prayer.
Yes, that's true. For those of his disciples that were not able to understand that the being of their being was God's being, he conceded that they were individuals, and as such encouraged them as individuals to have a personal relationship with God. And most prayers are indeed a prayer from an individual to a creator God. But in his own experience, he knew better. Although he couldn't often speak of it because the people around him wouldn't understand, so he had to step down his understanding. But in his own experience, his being was identical to God's being. You can't have a relationship with someone you're one with. A relationship means two. Jesus said, "I and my Father are one." So he did not have a relationship with his Father. He and his Father were one. But for those that didn't realize they were one with their Father, that considered themselves to be separate individuals, he said, okay, the highest state of the individual is to place your head under God's feet, to be in the right, that's the right relationship of the individual with the universal. one of prayer, devotion, surrender. But and most prayers, hymns, and so on in the Christian tradition are said from that point of view. But the ultimate prayer is it's for the one who prays to disappear. There's no room in the ultimate prayer. In the ultimate, it's not the individual that surrenders everything to God. It's the individual themselves who is surrendered to God. There's no room for the individual in God's infinite being. There's just God's infinite being. So at some point, the feeling of being an individual apart from God's being has to dissolve. Mm-hmm. And in the mystical Christian teachings, Meister Eckhart, for instance, when I am able to establish myself in nothing and nothing in myself, uprooting and casting out everything that is within me, then I am able to enter into the naked spirit, the naked being of the Spirit, which is the naked being of God. When he emptied himself of himself, he stood revealed as God's being. He didn't have a relationship with God's being. There was no Meister Eckhart left. Rumi said, in the existence of your love, I become non-existent. This non-existence linked to you is better than anything I ever found in existence. So all the mystics of all the great traditions, they all have this devotional relationship with God, but at some, and this is the most difficult thing for those on the path of devotion, to realize that at some stage you have to realize that the external God, if you still conceive of God outside of yourself and at an infinite distance from yourself, you are setting yourself up as a self apart from God's being, and that is blasphemy. That's why Meister Eckhart to pray to God, to rid him of God, to pray to the God that was at an infinite distance from himself, to rid himself of that idea of God, because in ridding himself of that idea of God, he ridded himself of his idea of himself as a separate self, and the real unity with what Meister Eckhart called the Godhead was then established. So I understand that this morning might have been a stretch for you as a Christian, and I meant no disrespect to the Christian religion. I was brought up, and as a Christian I sang hymns and psalms and prayers every day in boarding school for 10 years, and I love them. I love those hymns and prayers. In fact, this last few weeks I've been designing the memorial service for my mother in a couple of weeks' time, and it's in a church in Hampshire. So I've been going through all my old favourite hymns from Abide With Me and Lord of All Hopefulness and God Be in My Head, all these beautiful hymns and the language, and they're all couched in conventional dualistic language, and they're beautiful. So I don't mean any disrespect, nor do I. If you have this devotional relationship with God and you feel that God is something outside of yourself and at a distance from yourself that you pray to, I'm not criticizing that at all. If you have this loving, devoted relationship to God, you feel yourself surrendered to God in that way, then that's beautiful. I don't mean to imply any criticism of that. I respect that.
It's not, I see God in everything. I see spirit in everything.
Yes.
As in Trinity, I see the three in one, but So I see spirit, the God's spirit, consciousness in everything and in everyone. But I think I have to get over the obstacle of believing that there is a God who's listening to me when I pray. And that's quite a childish, probably, concept that I maybe have to get over. But thank you very much for answering my question.
Yes. No, you don't have to get over that childish concept. I still, when I was very young, I used to pray to God in a very conventional way. I still notice sometimes it happens out loud, only when I'm on my own. I still thank God out loud for things, and just when I'm on my own, this because the habit was so strong in me when I was very young. I still, and just for, not for the big things, if I am, what's an example? I drive home from London late at night and I get home safely. Turn the car off, get out of the car, and thank God for getting me home safely. Just simple, innocent, naive, slightly childish, but I still do it. So you don't have to get over that. All the great mystics of the world, Rumi and Meister Eckhart, they still spoke. All their prayers are conceived in dualistic language. All the great mystical literature of the world is couched in dualistic language. In fact, sometimes you read contemporary non-dual poems that attempt to express this understanding in non-dual language, and don't tell anyone this, don't paste it on Facebook or I actually prefer the traditional dualistic expressions. I somehow feel there's more. They're innocent, they're naive, they're a bit childish, but I feel the heart in them. I prefer them. And that's not meant with any disrespect. Some of the contemporary poems are utterly beautiful.